Sunumu için Sayın Gökhan Sekman'a teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi son konuşmacımız olan The University of Texas at El Paso Psikoloji ve Özel Eğitim Bölüm Başkanı Sayın Profesör Doktor Rick MYER'in özgeçmişini kısaca sunacağım. Profesör Doktor Rick MYER, 1987 yılında Memphis Üniversitesi Psikolojik Danışmanlık Bölümünden doktora derecesi almıştır. Aynı yıl Northern Illinois Üniversitesi'nin Danışmanlık, Eğitim Psikolojisi ve Özel Eğitim Bölümü kadrosuna katılmış ve bu kurumda 11 yıl boyunca ders vermiştir. Aynı kurumda 1996-1998 yılları arasında danışmanlık bölümünde bölüm başkanı olarak görev yapmıştır. Profesör Doktor MYER, 1998 yılında Pittsburgh'de bulunan 14 yıl ders vermiş olduğu Duquesne Üniversitesi'de danışmanlık eğitimi, okul psikolojisi ve özel eğitim bölümündeki pozisyonu kabul etmiştir. Duquesne'de Executive Counselor Education and Supervision doktora programında 3 yıl boyunca direktör olarak ve 2 yıl boyunca eğitim fakültesinde dekan yardımcısı olarak görev yapmıştır. Profesör Doktor MYER, University of Texas El Paso'da Temmuz 2012 yılında profesör ve eğitim psikolojisi ve özel eğitim bölüm başkanı olarak çalışmaya başlamıştır. Profesör Doktor MYER, 2001 yılında Duquesne'de Yaratıcı Öğrenme Ödülü'ne ve 2008 yılında Human Impact Issues for Crisis Management in Organization adlı makalesiyle The Emerald Literature Network Award for Excellence ödülüne layık görülmüştür. Görev aldığı akademik pozisyonların yanında Dr. MYER, akut tedavi psikiyatri hastaneleri, genel hastaneler, özel klinik, hastane dışı tedavi hizmetleri ve üniversite danışma merkezleri gibi klinik alanlarda da deneyim elde etmiştir. Dr. MYER'in çalışmaları ayrıca krize müdahale çerçevesinde kurumlara danışmanlık yapma, kriz durumunu hafifletmek için güvenlik güçlerine ve üniversite personeline eğitim vermeyi de içermektedir. Profesör Doktor MYER, krize müdahale alanındaki derin bilgisiyle ulusal ve uluslararası alanda ün elde etmiştir. Geliştirdiği krize müdahale triyaj değerlendirme sistemi sayısız kitapta yer almakta ve Amerikan Kızıl Haçı'nın ruh sağlığı gönüllüleri eğitiminde kullanılmaktadır. 30'dan fazla makale, 10 kitap bölümü, 3 eğitim el kitabı, 3 eğitici eğitimi el kitabı ve 5 kitabına ek olarak bölgesel, ulusal ve uluslararası alanlarda toplamda 50'ye yakın sunum yapmıştır. Chronicle of Higher Education, yakın zamanda yayınlanan This is not a fire drill, Crisis Intervention and Prevention on College Campuses isimli kitabı 6 Şubat tarihli sayısında dikkat çekmiş ve Psych Critics kitabın övgü dolu bir gözden geçirmesine yer vermiştir. Hakem, kitabın üniversiteler için endüstriyel standart olması gerektiğini belirtmiştir. Dr. MYER, krize müdahale alanında öğrenim ve çalışmalarına devam etmektedir. Kendisi şu sıralar yeni bir değerlendirme aracı ve alanda sistematik araştırmayı artırmayı hedefleyen bir krize müdahale modeli geliştirmek üzere çalışmaktadır. Kendisinin konuşmasını yapmak üzere sahneye davet ediyorum.
First, let me say thank you for inviting me and welcoming me to Turkey. This is my first time here. To all the distinguished personnel of the university, the rector, the provost, the dean, and particularly Professor Neshe for having me, and everyone else who's come to listen. I'm very honored and glad to be here through the sponsorship of Tubatak and also the university here. Just as a little background, the picture at the bottom is my campus, the tall building. I'm on the 7th floor. And as I've talked to people, I can see Mexico from my office window. What I would like to do is just briefly review what has been talked about to this point as a way to lead into my discussion of just one part of a very holistic model that I've helped develop over the past 20 years. When I started in crisis intervention, nobody really even knew what that was. My first introduction to it was just go out and do crisis intervention. Nobody trained me, nobody taught me. I had to figure it out all on my own. But I'm very impressed with the crisis intervention and management system here in the country of Turkey. Our first speaker talked about how in 1928 it started and how since that time it's evolved. And most recently, I think it was 2009, and I may have the date wrong, a new agency was started, and about how each time a disaster occurs, the agency learns something and does something different. Our second speaker talked about monitoring and assessment in order to provide services that are needed, which is very, very critical. Not only do you need to monitor the individual, but you also need to monitor the organization to make sure that they're providing the resources to the places that are most needed. That's some of my work that I do with organizations, in helping them to know what's going on within the organization so that they can target some solutions, some interventions to those areas that are needed. Our third speaker talked a little bit about the difference between using a diagnostic model and a crisis intervention model, and not relying upon instruments, assessment, ways of assessing things that are not specifically tailored to crisis intervention. The model that I'm going to talk very briefly about is specifically tailored to crisis intervention. And then our last speaker also, even in his brief presentation, helped me to know and understand that his ministry understands the complexity of providing services and the broadness of the type of services or the type of situations in which these interventions have to be given to people. So what I'm going to talk very briefly about is my triage assessment scale for crisis intervention. It was first introduced in 1992. And it came from an innocent question by a student, which I said, I don't know, let me go see what I can find out about it. And since that time, it has continued to evolve and has now become fairly widely known. It appears in over 15 textbooks. As the person doing the introduction, the American Red Cross is like the Red Crescent, but only the United States uses the model. And other people have also begun using it. There's also been lots of research done on this. So it's not just something that I made up, but also people have taken time to do research on and have found that it is a reliable and valid model for understanding people who are in crisis situation. As a matter of fact, one of my task here, or we are going to be doing some more training in 2 weeks or a week and a half now, and we're going to be collecting some data, because what is lacking on it is, while we believe it's cross-culturally appropriate and valid, no research has been done on that at this particular time. So we're going to be doing some research on that. So you can see all of these research studies that have been conducted. Since its development, we've developed many different forms. The original is the triage assessment form for crisis intervention. We revised that, I think it was in 2007 or 2008. We also have a form for families. We have a triage assessment form for organizations, in which we can go into organizations and through self-report get a good understanding of what's happening in organizations, so again that we can target the organization's resources to the areas that are most needed. One of the things that I've also been involved in is training law enforcement police officers to use this. This is a very popular thing in the United States as far as police officers being able to help people with mental illness, with mental disorders. It's basically a diversion system to keep them out of jails. You may not understand the acronym, but it's a triage assessment checklist for law enforcement. It's not just give us information and then we go and try to figure out what to do. The model that we've developed guides the intervention process. It also helps to justify the intervention. Many times, particularly law enforcement officers are called in by their superiors and they would be asked, why did you do this? And if they use this model, understand this model, then they can say, well, this is how we assess the person and this is why we did what we did. And it also helps monitor the intervention process so that you know what's going on at any given time and whether or not you need to adjust what you're doing to be helpful. Who can use this? One of the more elegant aspects of the model is anyone can use it. Psychologists can use it. Psychiatric nurses, social workers, mental health professionals. Those are just a few. We have also trained cafeteria workers to use this. We've also trained secretaries to use this, particularly in university settings where they see students walking around in crisis and so that they can even use it because it's a very simple, straightforward model. And here is my model, the triage assessment model. As you can see, it breaks crisis reactions into three basic components. There's the affective or feeling component, there's the behavioral component, and then there's the cognitive component. What we did in developing this is we further broke those down into various components. People will react in a crisis situation from their feelings, from their behaviors, and from their cognitive. The affective is based upon research on primary emotions, that of anger, fear, and sadness. Each person, regardless of whatever culture you were born in, you don't have to be taught how to be angry. You don't have to be taught how to be afraid, and you're not taught how to be sad. They are, in a sense, just part of the system, your brain. In a crisis situation, people are going to react in one of those three ways to varying degrees. They're going to be angry, they're going to be scared, or they're going to be sad. Behaviorally, people are going to either try to approach the situation. In other words, they're moving forward, trying to do something about it. Sometimes they'll try to avoid it or ignore it and pretend it's not there. And sometimes people are immobile or just stuck. And they're engaging in behaviors that are canceling the other ones out. Now there's a slight little wrinkle to the behavioral. They can either be constructive or beneficial, or they can be destructive. So just because you're approaching the crisis situation doesn't mean it's beneficial. Sometimes approaching the situation can be harmful. For example, a person who is, their house is on fire and they want to run in there and to get something out of the house. They're trying to save something. Well, that's not a good idea, a way to resolve the problem. Also, sometimes avoidance can be a very good thing. I think our third speaker talked about one time when the person came to you and was not feeling anything. My guess would be that person was immobile. And at that particular time, that was a positive thing. Now, if he had stayed that way for 2 weeks, that's probably not good. But for 48, 72, 96 hours, that was his way of just trying to understand or adjust to what was going on. Cognitively, people can react as something being a loss, something being a threat, or something being a transgression. The way to look at that is in a time frame. If I were teaching a class, I would take time now for you to try to think through this, but I'll give it to you in just as quickly as I can. A loss happens in the past. If somebody's talking to you that they've lost something, then that's a loss. If they're talking to you about something happening to them in the future, that's a threat. If they're talking to you about something happening to them right now in the present, that's a transgression. And I can give examples of that, but I want to be very respectful of the time here. But that very briefly is the triage assessment model. Part of the cornerstone of doing any kind of crisis work is assessment. And assessment has to give you information that you can use right now. When I first started looking into assessment and crisis intervention, I found several different models. One of which talked about using the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which you may or may not know what it is, but it's 560 questions. And can you imagine think of a time that you might have been in crisis in your life, because we've all had crises, and if somebody gave you a test or a questionnaire with 560 questions and you had to answer it, you'd not want to do that. So what this is in 5 to 10 minutes, you can know what's happening with a person and how to help them. We further look at this. Whichever one of the areas, affective, behavior, or cognitive, is the most severe, that's where you start the intervention process. The more severe the more severe the reaction, the more direct you're going to be in the intervention. That's my entire crisis class now in about 15 minutes. Let me see what else we got here. And that's all.